You need a resource, you need to get a resource. What's the last port of call?
Paying for it. Family no friend.
Paying for it. Paying for it. What are all the ways I can get a resource without having to pay for it? What's that called? It is the one word any entrepreneur, certainly any poverty entrepreneur, needs to have tattooed on their chest. Huh? Well, a good word would be bootstrapping, but a better word would be leveraging resources. Entrepreneurs are brilliant using other people's resources, using community resources, using resources in non-conventional ways. And the third part of that behavior is guerrilla behavior, thinking and acting like a guerrilla warrior in terms of non-conventional tactics, in terms of taking advantage of your surroundings, in terms of I want to elaborate on those things by getting into this toolkit. So first, some general advice. I'm not sure you can read all that, but as you work with these entrepreneurs, the first rule at BizStarts should be no MBA speak. You need to catch yourself when you start just using terminology that's everyday terminology in your business experience. So I used to have in our South Africa program, a fine. Anytime anybody used a word that, including me, and I paid a lot of fines early on, but how do you explain differentiation without using the word differentiation? How do you explain market segmentation without using the term market segmentation? Just get into that kind of mode and people will get it, will understand what you're doing. At the same time, we're not speaking down to these people. We're not coming from up on top of the mountain. They have a lot of street smarts. They're very capable, and it's speaking to them on an equal plane. It's not wasting time on topics that you know a lot about, but don't have anything to do with their business. You know, and so if you know a lot about exit strategies or you know a lot about angel investing, that's great, but it's probably not going to apply to their business. And so it's working on that entrepreneurial mindset. And I can talk more about that. I went through that pretty quickly, but I try to cite a lot of, any example I use is not going to be Uber. Any example I use is going to be a business that is a community-based entrepreneurial story. I tell a lot of stories, and those stories go a long way towards helping people feel comfortable with the concepts and tools. So, and some of those stories are embellished, and some of those stories I might have changed. It was this kind of business, and I changed it to this kind of business, but get used to bringing your ideas and your concepts alive with stories and examples from the real world, from actual companies or even made-up companies. You're doing things with them, not for them. What ideas do we like the best, each of us? Our own, right? So I don't care if you came up with the idea, you've got to convince them that it was their idea. It isn't about your ego, it's checking your ego at the door. It's about humility in listening to them because they're telling you things that you may not be hearing, that in fact reflect an understanding that may be richer than you about certain kinds of issues or topics. It is important that you. So I find, for instance, having a session with them where I'm simply asking them questions and telling them things is far less than productive than having a working session with them, with a piece of paper or whiteboard there, and let's walk through this together. Let's think through, how do your expenses get incurred? How do you capture revenue? Are you using a device on your phone to take credit cards? Well, how does that come back? But there, it's more, we call this process consulting. We're approaching, whether it's the selling process, the operations and production process, the record-keeping process, but look at their businesses as sets of processes and walk that process with them in a working kind of format. A big issue is progress begets progress. You know, when we get them registered, they'll take the next 3 steps on their own. When we create a website with them, they'll take the next 2 steps on their own. Taking steps begets them taking steps. And so, but when they can't see anything tangible happening, then they get stuck. But going the extra mile and getting to, okay, that got done, now they're reinforced and they'll take to, I can tell you story after story where that has happened. Don't simply make assumptions about everything you know about other entrepreneurs and so this is how they need to be, because their experience is just such a different experience. Don't get hung up on a business plan. You know, I'll talk to a mentor and say, I gave them an assignment, write 5 sections of business plan, and I'll talk to you when you finish those 5 sections. You know, the business plan matters, but to me it's getting into the business and getting stuff done and starting to understand pieces and parts and creating the business plan kind of as you go. But expecting that whole thing to be done up front before we take any more steps means steps just aren't going to get taken. And some of the existing tools I think aren't appropriate. So let's talk about some tools that are. First tool is what we call the commodity trap. If I start a cleaning business, if I have a truck and I haul away your junk, what's the nature of that business? It's a commodity in what sense?
Anyone with a truck can do it.
There's a bunch of other people with trucks that are doing it. So there's a bunch of competition.
No pricing power.
I don't have any pricing power, but what is the mentality of a person in poverty when it comes to setting their prices?
I take what I get.
They go low. Why do they go low? They underestimate the value that they're creating for customers, A, and B, they're poor. They are used to wanting things cheap. And so they will underprice. It is the most consistent problem I see. The most consistent problem is when you ask them who your customer is, and they say, everybody's a customer, which is like saying nobody's a customer. But the second is underpricing. So it is price-based. It's a business that's an intensely competitive market where there are a lot of substitutes that aren't really different from what you're selling, where you're trying to compete on the basis of price. And why is that the death knell of most of these businesses? Why can you not compete on the basis of price?
You don't have market power. You don't have.
Someone that charge less.
Because there's no advantage of having a lower price. It's only a matter of time before some clown will come along and undercut you. It's a never succeeding strategy because all you're doing to stay competitive is cutting margin and cutting margin and cutting margin. Meanwhile, what's true about your costs, your unit costs? They're higher. Why are they higher? What kind of businesses are most of these? Capital intensive? Labor intensive. And who's doing most of the labor? The entrepreneur. He's doing the cooking or the cleaning or whatever. So if it's labor intensive and I'm doing most of the work, I don't have the technological literacy or the financial wherewithal to incorporate process technologies. I don't have a point of sale system. I got a cash box. And so I'm not incorporating technologies. Meanwhile, can I afford that big industrial vacuum cleaner that'll do, 6 feet at a time of vacuuming? No, I'm using a Bissell, whatever. So I'm not buying the kind of equipment that would bring down my unit costs. I'm not incorporating the kind of technologies that would bring down my unit costs. It's inherently labor intensive and I'm doing most of the labor. Can you see why my unit costs are higher? and my prices are lower, so what's that leave in terms of margin? Nada, or hardly anything. So it's very tough to make money from the business. Given that, I'm not able to hold much in the way of inventory, which means I get customers who want to buy, but I can't serve them, and so they go elsewhere. My inventory levels are low. Further, and this is what Dan was saying, I have no bargaining power. So where am I buying? At retail. I'm buying at retail to sell at retail. I'm not buying the lot sizes, the volume, and I'm getting the volume kind of discounts. I'm not buying at wholesale. So my costs are higher, and I don't have the bargaining power with the supplier. So you start to put all this together, and this is from a strategic thinking standpoint, this is what you're working with. And so as mentors, as teachers, as however you're working with them, start with this commodity trap tool and start thinking about, if I can find ways to be a little different than competitors, or to pick a specialty niche that nobody's serving, well, then maybe I can charge a higher price, which starts to improve my margins, which may then feed into the ability to hold more inventory or to bargain more with suppliers. But how do I navigate a way with the entrepreneur to find themselves the way out of the commodity trap? Because this is pervasive with these businesses.
I would just point out that when you walk the entrepreneur through that trap, they have no idea that they were in that trap, and all of a sudden a light bulb goes on. Like, I have to be different, or this is what happens to me every time I try to start a business. Is I try to get lower prices, somebody undercuts me, and then I undercut them, and then we both go out of business, and somebody who knows about the commodity trap comes in and captures all the revenue.
Yeah.
It works.
So that's the first tool. Second tool is the entrepreneur's profit model. And so think about it as the logic of profit in the business. The logic of profit in your business is tied to, what are the first two key variables? Margins and volume, right? And this is eye-opening to a lot of these entrepreneurs, but ask yourself, ask your poverty entrepreneur, how does a grocery store work? How does a grocery store make money? The margins at a grocery store are as low as 1 and 2%. But when people go into the grocery store, they buy a basket full of food with $150 worth of stuff in it, right? And a lot of people do that. So what's the way the grocery store makes money? Low margin, high volume. How does a jewelry store make money? They don't sell a lot of diamond rings, so their volumes are pretty low. But the margin on a diamond ring is 300%, not 1 or 2%. So, think about all these, getting these entrepreneurs to think this way. High, medium, or low margins, high, medium, or low volumes, right? What's nirvana? High, right? Never happens. When it happens, well, give me an example of high.
Apple.
The iPhone. The iPhone, the margins are over the moon, and they sell one boatload, and that's why they have more cash than the US government. But that's the rarity. For most businesses, it's either high, low, medium, medium. For most of our entrepreneurs, and what would be the worst profit model? Low, low. Why are their volumes low? The market itself may not be that big, but why else would their volumes be low? It's a labor-intensive business. They don't have the capacity, they don't have the space, they don't have the equipment, they don't have the technology. So volume is constrained, but their unit costs are high and their prices are low and margins are constrained. You've got a low situation, which is a recipe for disaster. So you've got to find ways, working with them, to either, you're going to struggle to find ways to bring down their unit cost. You might be able to do that, but can you get them to do more value-based rather than cost-based pricing and bump up that margin? Or are there things you can do cleverly with market segmentation and so forth to increase their volume, the volume of business that they're able to handle? So we start there, okay? This issue, cost structure, what's that about? Well, when you look at your cost of your business, what percentage of the total cost is variable and what percentage is fixed? And you may need to use different terms to convey these ideas to some of these entrepreneurs, but they'll get it. You know, talk about overhead versus making units or whatever you want to describe it. But the upshot is, if I have a lot of fixed, so cost structure refers to the ratio of fixed cost to variable costs, say at break even. If I have a lot of fixed cost, first of all, what does that mean? What do fixed costs represent? We're paying a lot of rent, we've got a lot of insurance.
High overhead.
What's high fixed cost mean if you're an entrepreneur?
You can determine your cost.
High fixed cost means high risk. So these entrepreneurs, you typically do things with them to help keep the fixed costs. Well, I know you want premises, but I really think you could run this business from home for the next 6 months at least, right? Let's minimize that rent cost, right? Because if you're paying rent, you got to pay it every month, whether you got any business or not. It's a fixed cost. It's got to be, so you're more risk exposed. So the issue, though, is if the more you have high fixed costs, your margins either have to be high or your volumes have to be high. As your variable costs go up, though, that's going to start squeezing your margins, making it more critical that you find ways to grow volumes. We show these entrepreneurs all the time, with the margins you have, given your cost structure, if you got 100% of the market in inner city South Bend, we've already figured that's only $200,000 worth of sales, you would not be breaking even. And so the viability. And then the last piece of this is, well, what's your revenue model? How many revenue drivers do you have? And in many instances, this is showing them other ways they can capture revenue. So when I say revenue model, how's a bowling alley make money? 3 main revenue drivers, right? What do you pay for when you go bowling? You remember bowling. You pay for the games, right? You pay for the shoe rental, and you buy stuff at the snack bar, right? Okay, so a proper revenue model, if you're going to be successful with a bowling alley, would involve what? You'd have a model in mind for the percentage of revenue coming from each of those 3 sources, right? And what's probably true about the games? So they require a lot of maintenance, and so the reality is on the games we lose money. On the shoe rental we make a marginal profit. But where does 90% of our profit come at the bowling alley? The snack bar. Right? All right, the minute you know the snack bar is 90% of your profit, what does that lead to?
Increase the price.
No, what do I want to do? I want a lot of people at my bowling alley waiting to play, not yet bowling, because while they're waiting, what are they going to be doing? Using the snack bar, right? So I have leagues or I have competitions, I do things so that I have more bodies in the place that aren't bowling but that are using the snack bar, and I'm maxing out my profit potential. That's how these entrepreneurs need to start to think in terms of what is your revenue model? What are the things you can charge for? Which of those things will you make something on? Which of those things will you barely break even on? Which are your, you know, what's true at a place that sells copiers? Office equipment company. What's true there?
Maintenance.
They will sell, what's happened to the copier itself? It's become a commodity. All copy. Do you really know the difference between a Minolta and a Canon copier? They both do both sides. They both do color. They both staple, sort, right? It's a commodity, right? So if you're running an office supply business, right, you actually price your copiers at break even or at below cost. You lose money on the copiers. Why?
Paper.
Because if people buy your copier, they're going to buy your service contract. And what's the margin on the service contract? It's almost all profit, especially if you have high quality copiers, right? So it's getting them thinking that way. And then how do I put these four together? And I can give you some examples of businesses we've started where the model itself is flawed. And so this becomes a diagnostic tool. Are there things we can do? So I'll give you an example. We worked with a paintball battlefield. You know paintball, right? And it was an interesting thing because it was paintball battlefield, but I was at Syracuse University in New York, kind of like Wisconsin, where you can't play paintball battlefield a bunch of months out of the year. And so the capacity was constrained. Who plays paintball battlefield? Kids, right? And they're in school, and so this is disproportionately a weekend or a summer business in terms of, which severely constrains the volumes, right? But who are we selling to? Kids who don't have a lot of money, they're more price conscious, so our margins are medium at best. $10 a game, cost us $3, variable cost, $7 margin. But volumes are constrained. I can only put so many kids out on the field at the time. It's mainly summers and weekends, right? My cost structure is heavily fixed, right? But we run the numbers and you can't make money on this business. You cannot make money. Well, wait a minute. What if we add revenue drivers? Rather than just pay for the game, what do we charge for? Okay, we build a snack bar. New revenue driver. What else?
Provide the paintballs.
That's included in the price.
How about things during the week? Events during the week?
Okay, I could start to segment the market and go after corporations to do, where am I here? Sorry. I could go after companies and do team building kinds of activities and to get them the weekdays, so that's a good idea to build volume. But on the revenue side, well, you have to wait to get out there because I only put so many kids at a time, so we'll create a little video room where you play video games for price, right? And then I think, wait. Let's put cameras out in the trees in the paintball battlefield and take action shots so that when you get off the field and come back in, we got the photos laid out on the table. It's $10 a photo. Our cost of producing the photos are 7 cents. It's fixing the model by adding revenue drivers. So that's a tool that we use a lot. Bootstrapping, you're familiar with. I'm going to be quick here, but with bootstrapping, the idea of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps tends to focus more on financial things I can do, right? So when do I pay my bills? A lot of your entrepreneurs assume I should pay my bill as soon as I get it. When do I pay my bills? As late as possible. So I try to stretch my payables. Meanwhile, I'm trying to incentivize customers to pay cash ahead or put deposits down and shorten my receivables, right? So playing around out with things like that to get resources. But the bigger concept is leveraging. I mentioned that word before. This is, to me, the bootstrapping, and when we talk about the entrepreneurial mindset, leveraging, thinking guerrilla. So, using someone else's resources. You know, we got a guy who's a brilliant cook. Does seafood, does barbecue, right? And we registered him. And the problem is when you register a restaurant in South Bend, now they send that over to the health office and it has to be inspected, meaning you got to have premises and you can't do it out of your home, and he's been doing it out of his home. So what have we found for him, or helped him find? A church that has a kitchen. A lot of churches do have a kitchen, and on weekdays they'll let him use the kitchen between these hours to cook from. That's leveraging. It's using somebody else's resource instead of your own. It's using resources in non-conventional ways. So I'm starting a restaurant. I'm building a restaurant. All my money's in the restaurant, and I run out of money. I've kitted the place out, I got the menu, but I'm out of money. I don't have a penny left over. And I'm about to have my grand opening. I got nothing from marketing, and restaurants are a tough, competitive business. So, I start thinking, what do I have? Well, I have my restaurant. Let's have a party. Let's have a party at the restaurant. Free booze, free food, party, fun, festive party at the restaurant. But I'm only going to invite one kind of person to the party. I'm going to invite every hairdresser in Milwaukee. What do hairdressers do all day? They stand on their feet for 8 or 9 hours a day and they talk. Have you ever had a dead quiet haircut? They talk. And what are they going to talk about for the next 6 months? This amazing restaurant that I went to that had the free booze and free food and fun festive party at, just for hairdressers. Do you think of hairdressers like you think of TV or radio or internet advertising? Do you think of hairdressers as a marketing medium? I'm telling you, this is how you got to get your entrepreneurs to think. To see things as resources that they don't normally see as a resource for their business. To see how resources can be repurposed or used in different kind of ways to accomplish outcomes. You got no entrepreneurs. And by the way, that clever idea to have a party for hairdressers, some of you have marketing backgrounds, I can guarantee you could spend $150,000 on conventional radio, TV, or internet advertising, and you would get less return on that money than that entrepreneur got from the hairdressers. I'm saying it's more impactful than conventional media that they could never afford anyway. So getting them to think in leveraging kind of terms, stretching resources, and then something we call ham and egging, using resources to get resources, right? Ryan is a customer, right? But Ryan is also the head of the Chamber of Commerce, or he's some significant person, right? So I get him as a customer and I use him as a customer to get this supplier, or I'm playing resources off one another to get. So here are a bunch of, so I need a resource, I'm a low-income entrepreneur. And where does the conversation start and end when you talk about poverty and entrepreneurship? When you talk to the poor, when you talk to people that are supposedly experts, where does the conversation begin and end when you talk about poverty and entrepreneurship? Money. Financing. It's all about, well, those damn banks. Those damn banks just don't give money to the poor, don't give loans to the poor. You're not going to win that conversation. It is what it is. Leave that one at the door and focus on, let's assume you're not getting any bank money. Let's assume you're not getting any venture capital. let's assume you're not getting any angel investments. Now, how do we get resources? And the word that comes to the top of the list is leverage. So if I need a resource, whether it's a vehicle, or whether it's a machine, whether it's a building, I could buy it myself. And as I said before, that's the last thing I do. I can keep doing that. I can do it myself. I'll do my own bookkeeping rather than hire a bookkeeper. But everything else here, use free resources, borrow the resource. You know, what am I doing? You know, so a lady starts a florist shop, right? But she's got a terrible location, non-visible location. She can't afford to market. So what does she do? She goes to all the cafes, coffee shops, outdoor little places, and she puts flower arrangements on their tables. And the restaurant loves having flower arrangements, right? Little card, flowers by Louise or whatever, right? But using those tables, using bathroom doors, you know, using there's a plumber. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but he's a plumber, small business owner. And he has a vehicle, truck. He drives a truck. On his door, on the door panel, is a toilet with a pair of bare legs and pants down below the knees. So that when you look at the truck and he's driving, it looks like he's sitting on a toilet. Well, what do plumbers do? They fix toilets. That truck probably passes 15,000 cars a day. That's leveraging resources. In this case, resources I own, my truck. I'm using it in a clever kind of way. So, giving equity to get resource, sharing the resource. I can't afford a salesperson. Maybe you and I could go in together in our businesses and hire a salesperson together, or a billboard or whatever. I could rent or lease, I could outsource, contract, barter to get the resource, partner with the resource provider. Do all kinds of clever, this is the magic when you work with the poor. Showing them how to get stuff, how to think leverage rather than somebody's got to give me $15,000 loan before I can take another step. So the related concept is getting them to think like a gorilla. You know, what's our record in the U.S.? We're like 35-1 is our win-loss record in wars. Well, what's the one we lost? We did lose a war. Who did we lose to? Vietnam, right? Why did we lose in Vietnam? Well, a lot of reasons, but amongst others, we had far more weaponry, we had far more money, but the Vietnamese engaged in all kinds of guerrilla tactics. Their supply lines were underground. And there's a whole history of this. How the nomadic Arabs beat the Ottoman Empire, the French and Indian War in the United States. It goes back to where? Who's the original guerrilla? Small guy, under-resourced, beats the big incumbent. David and Goliath. Yeah. So this idea of how do you take advantage of your surroundings, how do you engage in stealth and clever kind of tactics is what the guerrilla thing is all about. So with guerrilla, let's take Enterprise Rent-A-Car. With Enterprise Rent-A-Car, they launch their business, and what's their immediate problem? It's a commodity. Why is it a commodity? Because there's so many, and they all rent subcompact, compact, mid-size, full-size, and Exotica. They all charge about the same thing. They all have the same terms, weekend rates, weekday rates. It's a commodity business. So how is Enterprise going to differentiate themselves? We pick you up was their source of differentiation. We pick you up, right? Well, the problem with that, for me, is I don't need to be picked up. I always get my rental cars at airports, going someplace, coming from someplace. Why would you need to be picked up? Huh?
Your car's in the shop.
My car's in the shop. Was in an accident or having the thing tuned up or whatever. So, enterprise starts and there ain't nothing happening. They're not getting the customers. It's not getting traction. They're sitting around. It's a Monday morning. It's 7 in the morning in enterprise, no customers. An entrepreneurial manager looks at the situation and says, go get 5 of our cars. They're just sitting around anyway. Go get 10 of our employees. Guys washing cars, guys working, women working the counter, whatever. Let's get 10 of our employees, 5 of our cars. All right, we do that. Let's drive those cars to Krispy Kreme donuts. Let's buy 30 dozen donuts. And let's take those donuts where? To auto repair shops, to body shops. Good morning, I'm Mike. I'm from Enterprise. We just wanted to wish you a happy Monday and a great week. Here's some donuts. Do you mind if we leave some business cards here on your counter? What do you think happens over the next 6 weeks? Referrals from these auto repair shops of their customers to Enterprise goes through the roof. That's the guerrilla mindset. Now you can spend a lot of conventional money or you can act like a guerrilla. So what I've tried to do here is give you a bunch of specific. With guerrilla, there's a million things you could do. So how do we organize those? I've tried to organize them for you. So I had my favorite entrepreneur in South Africa who actually ultimately built it. He's got 100 locations now. And he's still guerrilla to the max. But he would go to in a township, people living in shacks, right? And these townships are like, well, the one he lived in was about 1.5 million people living in shacks, dirt road, but growing fast. And he would walk into a radio station that had just started, broadcasting in Khayelitsha in South Africa. And he'd look around and he'd notice they don't have any computer equipment. Well, his business, his whole thing was to bring computer literacy to the impoverished in the townships. So he goes to the radio station and he sees they don't have any computer equipment. So what's he say to them? I'll give you some computers and I'll give you computer training for your staff in exchange for radio advertising would be good, but he's more out of the box. What's even more out of the box than radio advertising? Yeah, who said that? His own show. That's what he asked for show. And they go, what you've never done? He said, give me 15 minutes once a week show on technology. I'm not going to talk about my business. That show becomes the highest rated thing on the radio station because the poor want to understand technology and he's talking their language in terms of technology, but it's barter. So whether it's barter, you know what reciprocity is? So we worked with a theater out in Honolulu, and this was a theater that showed foreign flicks and kind of art kind of stuff. Yeah. And across the street from the theater, they had like 5 or 6 theaters. Across the street from it was this open-air pizza and beer joint. Big banyan tree, some inside, mostly outside. So every week, the theater would advertise movie times in the Honolulu newspaper. And every week, the pizza and beer joint would advertise beer specials or whatever, pizza specials. So what do we get them to both do? At the bottom of the ad that lists what's on at the theater this week, right across the street from Bilbo's Pizza. And at the bottom of the ads for the beer and pizza place, Bilbo's, add this bar right across the street from the Varsity Theater. They've just doubled their advertising exposure without spending any money. So I've got a whole bunch of examples here. I'm conscious of time, and you'll get these slides. But I've got all these categories. We had some kids. Do you know what RIP clothing is? RIP clothing. So when we have a drive-by shooting or some kind of gang violence or somebody and some kid gets killed, right? They'll put that kid's picture on a t-shirt, right? Well, these inner city kids say, I think that we can start a business. In fact, they called it RIP clothing. And they did well with their RIP clothing in the inner city, but they weren't getting into the suburbs and hitting all those kids. So what do? Think gorilla. What do? If you don't love this stuff, then this poverty thing's not for you. This is how you got to this is how you got to work them. This is how you got to help them. What the kids did? How do they get into the suburban schools? Huh? Sort of. They actually did their research and they figured out at each school who were the most popular kids, the so-called opinion leaders. They gave the clothing to the opinion leaders wear the clothing in the school, and everybody wants to buy RIP clothing. That's a cool thing to have. So, there's just a whole lot of different ways to do this. I'm happy to elaborate on any of these, but these would be categories of ways to do, stealth even. A camera company launched a new model of a camera, and they would actually have employees pretend to be tourists and go up to other tourists in tourist hotspots and say, hey, would you take my camera and take our picture? So obviously the tourists go, man, what a cool camera. What kind of camera? They start asking about the camera, and obviously there's some ethical issues involved here. But so I got a lot of examples of the guerrilla thing. But this is Wisconsin, right? The master guerrilla marketer is Harley Davidson. Harley Davidson has the smallest marketing budget in the major motorcycle producers, because they think guerrilla. How much is an ad on the Super Bowl? 15 or 30 second ad on the Super Bowl. Millions, right? What do people watch when they watch the Super Bowl? Not the game, I guess, unless the Packers are playing. They watch the ads and they watch the halftime show. So Harley gives Harleys to the organizers of the halftime show, and those people then figure out a way to weave a bunch of Harleys into the show. They just got free $1 million ads by thinking guerrilla. And they do a lot of other things that...
Professor, we're only 15 blocks from their main corporate manufacturing plant. You might want to stop there afterwards. They lost $94 million in the second quarter. They need you. You need to turn them around now. They need your help. Yeah, why not? You could help them. They need you guerrilla marketing.
Okay, I'm with you.
And their CFO is on our board, too.
So they used to be good guerrilla.
Yeah. They got really hit this last couple of years. They need you now. They're not doing guerrilla marketing.
Not the way they were. Yeah.
Not the way they were.
Well, they were a role model for it for a long time. But when you sit down with your entrepreneurs, you're asking them three questions. You're at with this whole thing. What internal resources do you have that you're not fully utilizing? Your truck, your facility roof, or advertising on the carts in the grocery store, or on the floor in the grocery store, or on the ceiling. We had an entrepreneur who went through our program, and he started advertising on the ceiling of his barbershop, right? Because he put the chair back, and people would look up, and he's got messages up there. So how well are we leveraging relationships with people in our organizations? You know, the guy that ran the DC soup kitchen in Washington, DC, had a problem with supply. So he did all kinds of leveraging in guerrilla. He partnered with 15 of the 3- and 4-star restaurants in town, took all their throwaway stuff, brought it into he starts a catering business where he's got ex-cons catering congressional events. These are, and cooking out of the food, you know, the pantry. But his most brilliant idea is he goes to schools in the suburbs around DC and he says, can we use your kitchens? Well, it turns out their kitchens aren't used for lots of hours in a day and months in the summer and so forth. And in exchange for using their kitchens to prepare food for the hungry and the homeless, he taught a culinary class in each of the high schools. Well, that's all guerrilla and leveraging kind of thinking. So, and then finally, one untapped or underutilized resource are the community. You know, those tabletops over there in the cafes or what have you.
This facility which we're getting free.
Exactly. The last thing I'll touch on, because I know we're long here, is this whole, I said entrepreneurs don't take risks, they're clever at mitigating and managing risk. When you think about risk with the poor, risk comes from two things. Magnitude of loss, how much could I lose, and probability of loss, what's the likelihood that I'm going to lose. And this is the thinking, the focus of conversation should not be how do we maximize the upside. The focus of the conversation with the poor should be how do we minimize the downside? How do we lessen your exposure if this doesn't work out or if things go bad for a prolonged period of time? And so you're playing with both of these elements. Are there any things, actions, decisions that can be taken that lessen the magnitude of risk? Well, why don't you work from home instead of renting space for now? Magnitude. Or to reduce the likelihood of things going south. So what I've tried to do here, so you're trying to either share the risk with somebody else. Well, the bank gave me a line of credit. The bank's now taking some risk. Stage the risk, isolate the risk, or lessen the risk. And here are specific things that we do with these entrepreneurs to help them lessen their risk exposure. So I'll stop there. I'm sorry for going on so long, but I wanted you to get some of these tools that we use when you're actually working with these folks, getting into their worlds. That's all I got.
What I think is so helpful about us for our coaches and our mentors is I love the tools. I mean, the idea that we have a now process, and it's what we've lacked. This fills that gap. I think you're setting the stage, though, having lived in Kenya and East Africa, when you go into another culture, you have to adjust and learn how to do it. And you give us the theoretical basis, how to talk to entrepreneurs in a different way than you do. I think it's absolutely, this will become our Bible. So it's another